We're happy to have Arland Thornton here. He's had a distinguished career at the University of Michigan. He's been president of our major populationist society, received many awards, and I could take the rest of the day reading his publication list, but I won't do that. For this group, I think there are just two things that I want to mention. I think he's been to more countries to collect his own survey data than anybody else I know. And he's been all over the globe. You'll be amazed if he gives you the list. So if you want to know about people's ideas about what development is in a particular place that you might be working on for your report this month, then ask him some questions. He's been around. The other thing I wanted to mention, just at random, I was trying to be a lobbyist on Capitol Hill this week and ran into a colleague who got her degree at University of Michigan, so we were comparing notes. I said, well, Arland Thornton, do you know him? Oh, he's just the nicest person. She said he was such a support and a good mentor. And so if you're thinking about University of Michigan, especially in sociology or population studies, you really need to get to know him. But I really want to hear what he has to say, so let's turn the time over to him and welcome him here. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, for that very nice introduction. The material I'm going to present to you today actually is largely written up in this paper with the same title as the talk today. And it's an invited paper at the new journal, their inaugural issue of the Sociology of Development. And I'm also pleased in this setting, especially to tell you that my two co-authors are graduates of BYU, as I am. So this is the second paper I've written with these guys, and the first paper I've had two BYU alumni as co-authors. Jeff Swindle also happens to be a graduate of the International Development minor here. He majored in sociology and minored in development here. He gave me some advice on what I might say and not say to this audience. So at the end, I'm going to have a couple of things I usually don't say, but I will. And then I want to also recognize my lovely daughter here, who a few years back did an internship study abroad program to Uganda through the Ed School and the International Center. So it's delightful for me to be here at BYU. I was just thinking up, it's been about the length of time when I graduated from here that's indicated by the amount of gray hair I have. So it's been a while. So anyway, thank you for the invitation. It's nice to be here. I look forward to sharing ideas with you. Now, I believe that it's good to let people know what you're going to try to say. So I'm not going to try to keep anything hidden from you. I want you to know where I'm going. So I got three main theses. And it's all about something called developmental idealism, which I'll explain to you. First thesis is that developmental idealism has been spread widely around the world among both elites and non-elites. The second main thesis is that developmental idealism provides the cultural foundation for world development programs. It's the ideology, the value system, the belief system that underlies what people try to do in development programs. And my third main thesis is, I think, probably the most important ones. It's been a major factor in changing the world, and I'll try to show you why I believe that. So, first of all, what is developmental idealism? And the first thing to say about that is it's an ideation or cultural model. And that should force you to ask me, well, what's culture? And there there we go. I've got 4 major aspects of culture. First of all, it's mental. It's in the head, but it's also shared amongst other people. It tells us how the world works, how the world's organized, how it operates. It tells us what causes what. It tells us how to live in the world, what's good, what's moral. It provides both ends and means. It guides behavior and decision-making. And it tells us what the appropriate roles and relationships are. So it includes a lot of things: worldviews, beliefs, values, norms, attitudes, and numerous other things. And I wanted to bring this a little down central to this audience and just say to you that religion is a culture. And religion is a culture that includes all of these same things: worldviews, beliefs, values, and so forth. And every society in the world has had its own culture. And in all of those cultures around the world, we have these things: worldviews, beliefs, values, norms, attitudes. And developmental idealism is one such culture. It's not related to any particular place, but it has a wider, worldwide kind of entity. So what's the content of developmental idealism culture? I decided I would start again with something direct relevance for you. I was nosing around your Kennedy Center website after I agreed to come and give this talk, and I found your write-up on the International Development Minor. And I said, this is a good example of developmental idealism. So I'm going to read part of it to you. And this I'm quoting: "International development is the effort to describe, understand, and improve economic, social, and political deficiencies in people's lives through social programs and projects. Because these deficiencies are often vast and always varied, international development encompasses many issues, including foreign aid, education, economic development, public health, sustainable agriculture, appropriate technology, community development, gender equality, microfinance, disaster preparedness, human rights, environmental protection, food security, poverty reduction, and others." So it's a very broad approach. I'm going to be similarly broad and cover lots of things. I'll give you a little more formal definition of developmental idealism, but this fits in that framework. So developmental idealism, you can trace its roots back to ancient Greece, ancient Rome, through Christian theologians, the Enlightenment. It's been an important part of Western thought since the Enlightenment. It was dominant in social thought and public policy of the 19th and 20th centuries. There's many different versions of it, but all of them have important things in common. So one of the important things about developmental idealism is it's a model of change. So it's all about social change, individual change, and one of the key parts is that change is pictured as natural, uniform, necessary, and directional. So we often think of personal development, and we think of children going through stages of development from birth, childhood, and so forth. As they go through those stages, we say they're developing. That has often been adopted at the societal level, where societies are thought to go through these same stages across time. And for a couple hundred years at least, people have been putting societies on this developmental map. This is one of my favorite ones. It comes from Edward Tyler, who's often thought of as the father of anthropology, writing in England at the end of the 19th century. He said there's nothing more natural than that societies progress like from the Australian Aborigines to Tahiti, the Aztecs, China, Italy. It shouldn't surprise you that he ended up with England on top. A lot of people think we don't do that anymore. We stopped doing that in the 19th century. The next chart I'm going to try to convince you is we haven't stopped doing that. This is United Nations Human Development Index. It gets published every year in something called a Human Development Report. Here are some numbers I took out for some countries. And you can see it looks pretty much like Edward Tyler's list. The exact countries are a little different. We have England and the US, an English offshoot up here. Somalia's on the bottom. Really the only difference between this and Edward Tyler is the United Nations spends a lot of money with a lot of very smart people coming up with very precise numbers where Edward Tyler didn't have them. So with that kind of a model of change, putting societies on a developmental model, we end up, scholars over the last couple of hundred years have identified a lot of things that are modern, and developmental idealism says modernity is good. So these attributes I've listed up here are viewed as both modern and good. On the family arena, which I've studied most of my career, developmental idealism says monogamy is modern, it's good, so is older age of marriage, all the way down. I want you to get these in your mind because we're going to come back to these later. Also wealth and health, technology, social norms, pluralism, individualism, universalism, freedom and equality, human rights, free markets, education. All of these things are viewed within the developmental idealism framework as modern and good and something that humanity should be striving for. There's also beliefs within developmental idealism, and I've only pulled out a few of what I could identify scores and scores. Some of the most important have to do with economic development. So developmental idealism states that economic development will bring more democracy, lower fertility, more education, more gender equality, increased human rights, and so forth. And perhaps even more importantly, developmental idealism tells us what's going to get us developed. So democracy will help develop us, planned and low fertility will help develop us, so will schools, so will gender equality, so will human rights and individualism. So this is part of the causal explanations, part of the belief structure that's in the developmental idealism framework. There's lots of other beliefs about causes and consequences, education facilitating gender equality facilitating education, small families facilitating education, and so on. Now, one of the things I want to make sure comes across here is that developmental idealism is a cultural system with enormous power. It's not just a set of inert ideas. It has enormous power. One of the first things that gives it power is that it suggests a dynamic, changing world. So you're going to move from traditional to modern. That's natural, it says. It indicates what's good and valued. It shows what the future and the good life are to be found in the West. It provides a model for progress. It indicates how to achieve development. It indicates the consequences of development. And all of these things are very different from what local people around the world lived through for hundreds of years before developmental idealism came to them in different ways. So it's powerful. It can change things. Now, I want to make a couple caveats here, make sure that you understand some things that I'm not saying. First of all is I'm not pushed the wrong button. First of all, I'm not endorsing or advocating developmental idealism. I'm not trying to reject it either. I'm being neutral. It's just a culture, and it's out there. I'm not arguing that its values are good or bad. I'm not arguing that its beliefs are valid or invalid. The point's not whether its values and beliefs are true or false, good or bad. The point for me in this talk is whether they are accepted, rejected, or modified. It's whether they motivate behavior and produce social change. So, my first main thesis is that developmental idealism has been spread widely among both elites and non-elites around the world. Virtually all countries and virtually all levels within countries. I've listed up here some ways that developmental idealism gets spread. It's a long list, and it's an incomplete list. I'll let you sort of look at it instead of me reading through it for you. And the way it gets spread varies by place, by time. So sometimes it comes from Christian missionaries, other times from mass education, other times from foreign aid programs, and so forth. Now, I decided that I wanted to find out just exactly what people around the world thought about developmental idealism. So as Tim alluded to, our research team has conducted some kind of research, mostly surveys, in 18 countries around the world. This does not represent a random sample of the world's population. It doesn't represent a random sample of the world's countries. It does represent a lot of diverse countries. And we've tried to find out what individual people like you and me, shopkeepers, farmers in Nepal, peasants in Western China, people in Albania, what they think about these ideas. Some of the results, I'm going to summarize them for you, and then I'm going to give you just a couple of examples. So first of all, most individuals around the world understand and use the concept of development. It'll be in their own language, but most individuals understand it. They have developmental idealism beliefs about what things are associated with economic development. People have developmental idealism beliefs that economic development causes other changes. They have belief that certain changes increase economic development. They have beliefs about future changes in the direction of modernity. And many people value many aspects of modernity. So I'll give you a couple examples of this. I had this slide here. We decided we wanted to find out what ordinary people around the world thought about development and rating countries. So we asked them to rate countries on a 11-point scale. How developed do you think Japan is? How developed do you think the Central African Republic is? And we asked thousands of people. We took the averages, and I'm going to show you the averages now. So for a sample of people in Nepal, we asked them to rate these countries, and here's their average scores. And if you look at them fairly closely, you'll see they generally look like the UN scores. Not exactly, but generally. If you calculate a correlation coefficient between this column of numbers and this one, you get a high number that you at first don't believe it's that high. And in Argentina, we did a similar thing, and they ended up looking like this. So at least in those two countries, we said people understand what development is. They think of it like the UN does. These ideas have penetrated to Nepal. These Argentinians turn out to be high school students. That's who we selected, was high school students. Now the next chart here, we did this kind of thing in 14 countries around the world. And Sean Doria said, let's make a graph, and we'll put on the graph, we'll put the UN Human Development Index on the x-axis. On the y-axis, we'll put the average scores that people gave to different countries, and we'll just graph it out. And you'll see we have a general upward trend of going, when the UN index goes higher, our respondents' average scores go higher. If you're used to interpreting correlation coefficients, you'll see we have a pretty high one. So around the world, 14 countries, people understand this concept and use it and rate countries pretty much like the UN does. Here's another example. We asked Egyptians how development and freedom, democracy, and human rights went together. This is the percent of Egyptians saying that development brings freedom, democracy, and human rights. That's a developmental idealism statement. 80% of Egyptians said it brought freedom, 91% said it brought democracy, 91% said it brought human rights. Again, answers that are very much in line with the developmental idealism cultural model. We changed the order around, and this time I'm showing you the percent of Egyptians, Iraqis, and Lebanese saying that freedom brings development. And almost 80% of Egyptians and Lebanese say that freedom brings development. It's smaller in Iraq. If you want to ask me in the question and answer period why I think it's smaller in Iraq, I'll give you a 5-minute guess as to why that's the case. And then in Malawi, here's the percent of Malawians saying development brings older marriage, self-choice marriage, gender equality, and low fertility. Again, those are developmental idealism answers, beliefs. Again, we have overwhelming percentages of Malawians saying that development does those things. I think this is the last one of these I'm going to show you. This is the percent of Nepalese saying older marriage, self-choice marriage, respect for women, and contraceptive use would make Nepal richer. And you'll see, except for self-choice marriage, we have almost 9 out of 10 saying that these things will make Nepal richer. Again, consistent with the developmental idealism belief. So let me go to my second and third main thesis. Second one, developmental idealism provides the cultural foundations for world development programs, and that developmental idealism has been a major force for worldwide social change. And what I want to do here is to illustrate some ways in which this has been true. And as I was preparing this talk, I sort of had to decide between giving you in-depth examples in particular places of particular things, or showing you a breadth of things and not go very deep in any one of them. And I decided that my most important message here was to let you know how broad the effects have been. And I hope I can illustrate as I go along how deep they've been as well. But the main point is how broad they've been, how many substantive areas that developmental idealism has touched, and how many countries have been touched by it. So let me give you my first one. And this is that national and international development programs have become sort of standard around the world. They first started in the Soviet Union in the 1920s. Many of them got adopted after World War II. And by the 1990s, 135 countries had adopted national development programs, development plans. Many countries have international development agencies. For example, the U.S. Agency for International Development. Canada has one, England has one, Norway has one. There's many non-governmental development agencies, the Millennium Development Goals, and I added in your development minor here at BYU fits right in with this emphasis on development plans and programs around the world. Another one is the spread of mass schooling. Well, this really started with early missionaries going around the world. They promoted schooling to convert and civilize the natives. Education is now a central element for development programs. For example, it's a central element in the Millennium Development Goals. It's a central purpose of many education mission statements. And we've seen the global expansion of education after World War II, which has been phenomenal. Another one is international relations. This model has helped legitimize the slavery of Africans. It's helped legitimize the conquering of the Americas, Western colonization. It's been important in East-West relations in Europe. Western European military campaigns in the East. Napoleon looked down on those backward Russians. So did Hitler. He treated them the same. It's affected the way Europe was divided after World War II. It affected the way the Iron Curtain got built. It's affected the way the European Union has expanded after the fall of the Iron Curtain. Another example of the DI effects is the international human rights movement. We have more than 100 human rights instruments that are now in force, and they've been ratified by numerous countries around the world. A fifth one is the International Family Planning Programs. Before 1950, every government in the world was pro-natalist. From the 1960s onwards, family planning programs have been initiated worldwide. And over the last several decades, fertility has declined in almost every country in the world. Another one is the International Program to Increase Maturity and Consent in Marriage. Mature marriage has been declared by the United Nations to be a human right. Marital consent has been declared to be a human right. And over the last several decades, age at marriage has increased in almost every country of the world. The International Gender Equality Movement is another example. We often think of it being fairly recent. You can actually trace it back to the 18th century when it was very small, very weak. But it's been enshrined in international human rights treaties, and equality for women has increased in many places. Maybe not as many places or as much as a lot of us would like, but still has increased in many places. Another example of developmental idealism effect is new freedoms. So we have new freedoms to divorce, new freedoms for sex, cohabitation, and childbearing outside marriage, new freedoms for same-sex relations, including marriage, and the freedom to never marry and to be childless. Another example that I want to emphasize is there's been lots of national and international culture clashes around developmental idealism and local cultures. Every society, as I mentioned, has had its own cultural models, its own beliefs and values. The introduction of developmental idealism has led to numerous clashes and conflicts. We have had and continue to have battles over abortion, sex, marriage, and same-sex relations. Political clashes between developmental idealism and Islam in the Middle East is a major story in today's international relations. Many in the Middle East see the United States as immoral, and the perceptions of the imposition of Western morality or immorality on non-Western societies is a big issue. I'm now going to shift from substance things to some particular countries, and I want to start with China. In 1800, if you went to China, they could have cared less about what England or the United States or any Western European country was doing. But then, starting in the middle of that century, the West started to incur on China, gunboat battles, wars, and beginning in the 19th century, China began to search for modern China. How are we going to get to be developed? How are we going to get to be modern? They sent students to the West, and they imported Western experts in education. They eliminated foot binding early in the 20th century. The 1911 revolution was a revolution with Western ideals. The 1949 communist revolution also had developmental ideals and adopted a Marxist model of development. There was a post-World War II emphasis on social equality. They had a marriage law incorporated in 1950 that looks like they just copied developmental idealism right into the marriage law. And then we have the famous one-child program, and China now has exceptionally low fertility. Turkey is another of my favorite examples. From the 19th century onward, the Ottoman Empire said we have to be adopting more Western things. They first of all worked to Westernize the military. They brought in a wide range of Western education and experts. In 1923, developmental idealism, in a very real way, became the policy and program of Turkey. They adopted the Italian Penal Code and the Swiss Civil Code. They adopted the Latin alphabet, gave up the Arabic alphabet to the Latin alphabet, adopted the Gregorian calendar, and Western clothing and measurement systems. They abolished the caliphate and closing of religious schools. If you're paying attention to ISIS in the Middle East today, you'll know they've claimed to reestablish this caliphate as an anti-developmental idealism approach. But in 1923 or 4, the caliphate was in Turkey and was abolished by Westernizing folks. They outlawed polygamy and set minimum marriage ages, and gender equality laws have been passed. I recently discovered the Native Americans of the Columbia River Plateau up in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. We usually don't think of these folks as being international relations, but in 1800, when this story starts, these people were not in the United States. This was international relations. They were met beginning with the Lewis and Clark Party in 1805. Fur traders, missionaries, and the U.S. government influence. Many of them converted to Christianity. Their economy was transformed from hunting, gathering to agriculture. Schools were established, tried to impose an American system of government. Great emphasis was to replace their own clothing and hairstyles with Euro-American forms. There's the adoption of Euro-American names. They eliminated polygamy, and they worked to achieve proper family division of labor. So let me come back to my three main theses. Developmental idealism has been spread widely. It provides the cultural foundation for world development programs, and it's been a major force for worldwide social change. Now, I've presented these things to you as a way of giving you a framework, a model, to help understand a lot of the social change occurring around the world. So this is a theory, it's data. I haven't told you anything about how to make the world better, how for you to get richer, how to make your country richer, how to make Zimbabwe richer or Bolivia or any of those kind of things. And I haven't done that because I'm not sure I know how to do that. So it seems pretty safe not to try to tell you how to do it. But Jeff Swindle said I should tell you something practical. And so I've come up with some final thoughts for development practitioners. This is my list of thoughts. I'm just going to throw them out to you. You can chew on them. I've been chewing on them for a while. I'm going to keep chewing on them. First thing I want to say is this developmental idealism model is man-made. It's socially constructed. It wasn't revealed from God. It didn't come from the cosmos or the universe. We human beings made it up. And mostly we Europeans and European Americans made it up. So it's very Eurocentric. And one of the things I would suggest to development practitioners is they should question the model. They should realize, I think, that social change is very often not uniform and directional, that local cultures matter a lot, and there may be better options and pathways to societal development. Continuing, if we're going to get into this game, I think we should be very careful to make sure that we see other people as different, not inferior. Recognize that people everywhere are smart and competent. We should learn a great deal about the people that we want to help. We should include the people you're trying to help in the formulation of programs. People on development programs should be prepared for very diverse outcomes. And you shouldn't be surprised if you see resistance and hybridization. They sort of combine what you're trying to give them with what they're already doing. Very seldom do they adopt everything that you want in your development program. So those are some thoughts. If somebody tells me some of them are wrong, I won't care. But just for things for you to think about. Let me close by saying thank you for your attention. Thank you for being here. I welcome any of your questions, any of your criticisms, suggestions. If you have new things we should be doing, let me know. Some old dogs can learn new tricks, so I'd like to think I'm in that category, so let me know. And if you're interested in anything I've said, I've got a website that's there. And I invite you to have a look. If you forget the website, type in Developmental Idealism into your Google browser and you'll find our website. So again, thank you very much for coming. Thanks for your attention. I'm open for questions, comments, etc.
So we've got a few minutes, and just ground rules, and encourage you to come line up behind the wireless mic since we are recording. Tell us your name, and we have a few minutes to ask questions for Professor Thornton. First one's always the hardest. All right.
I'm Ben Gibbs in the sociology department. I'm just curious what got you started on the topic of developmental idealism. Did you have initial interests in seeing its effect globally as positive or negative? And what did you anticipated, looking at the subject, what did you anticipate you could accomplish with maybe revising some of the ideals, or were you more just understanding its influence?
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that question. To answer it, I may get more long-winded than you want, but developmental idealism started for me in Taiwan. I'm writing a book on social change in the family in Taiwan. I'm writing a theory chapter. The theory chapter I'm writing is about how the theories that explain family change in the West worked in Taiwan. The more I worked on that, the more unhappy I got. I was using a theory that came from the West to work in Taiwan. I didn't like that. And then I knew it didn't work in the West either. That made me doubly unhappy. So I said there's a theory of development, a theory of social change. It's been around for a couple hundred years. We've discovered recently it's wrong. Why did we believe it? So I went over to the University of Michigan library and I found a bunch of old books that hadn't been opened for decades. And I decided to read them and find out what scholars had been doing for 200 years to believe some models that turned out were not right about family change. And it was then I discovered this developmental model. Scholars believed in development, uniform pathways of development. As I showed up here, you can map out countries from low development to high development. And it's a very easy step to say that England 100 years ago must have been like what China is today, or what India is today. And that's what people did for 200 years. And then when they looked through the English archives, they found none of that was true. You can go back for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years in England and you never find any Indians or Chinese or Macedonians or anybody who they thought they would find. And then I said, this is a powerful model. It got scholars wrong for 200 years. Maybe it's an important model for what the world is doing in other ways. And I started saying, demographers have been telling the world if they lower their fertility, it'll make them developed. The one-child policy in China is exactly that implementation of that policy. And then my eyes started opening and wider. First I stayed on the family, and this is the first paper, first talk where I've expanded it to education and government and other things.
Would you call it developmental realism as the perspective you prefer? I mean, so in some ways you're concerned that idealism is not the proper perspective to have about these developmental goals. Would you suggest that there needs to be more realistic approaches or just modified by country?
I think idealism, I worked hard on these two words and putting them together. I tried out some other ones which I've now long forgotten. And this one I'm still pretty happy with. It explains the model of what people are using. It's coming from ideas in the head. It's ideal, we're going to make everything better. And that these ideas, these ideals have been implemented for a long time around the world. I don't make any claims whether these are good or bad. I've got some ideas that some of them I don't like. But there's an awful lot of them, so I wouldn't, even in my most wild, exuberant moments, I wouldn't try to say it's all good or bad. That's how I got into it. Did I turn off the rest of your brains? He's been a tough questioner for quite a few years. So.
By calling this a culture, which part of it clearly is, but it seems to imply that all of the causal force here is just culture. And so to make a really strong analogy that I don't quite believe, we could take the germ theory of disease, for example, and say that's an idea that's really changed the way we do public health, and it's had a huge impact on the world. But it's not just a culture. The fact is, when we do this, we get things that people really like. They don't get sick as much. And when we do some of these other changes that you've talked about, we also get some things we like. People have more food to eat, their children don't die, we have more material comfort. So some of the causal force here, I think, is not just the cultural ideal, but the fact that when we do these things, people get real benefits that they like. So how much of the force of this model is because of culture, or how much of the culture emerges because when we develop, we get things that people really want? That makes sense?
So I've explained a cultural model. I've explained that I think it has big consequences. I also want to, which I should have done before, I should have emphasized this isn't the only thing that's going on. So there's lots of other things going on in the world besides cultural models. More factories, more cities, more, all of those kind of things do change the world too. So the world is a let me rephrase that. It's multiply determined. And it's hard to figure out exactly how much of this developmental idealism model comes from actual observation that these things work, or actual observation that they might not work. It's my understanding, Jeff Swindle told me that a few years ago Bill Easterly was here. And I've read Bill Easterly's, one of his books. And I think he claims none of this stuff makes people actually more developed, more richer. I'm not sure I believe that. But Bill Easterly knows more about that than I do. And so I don't know how much of it is really empirically based, how much of it we've believed. A lot of it we have believed in the West. So Robert Malthus wrote 3 or 4 volumes on human population and claimed that Europe got richer because they developed an older age at marriage and fertility went down, and so Europe got rich for those reasons. Turns out when you look at the historical record, neither of those things are true. Europe didn't get richer because age at marriage increased. Age at marriage was always high in Europe. Fertility was always a bit lower in Europe because age at marriage was higher. So Malthus, on those fundamental propositions, got it wrong. I don't know whether it's true in Bangladesh or not. I know it wasn't true in England. And indeed, one of the drivers of this, people do want to be richer. They do want to have more stuff. Anything that will get them more stuff, they're very much into, in my opinion, all around the world. Very few people rejecting the proposition that more is less. I'm sorry, I misstated that. Most people say more is more.
Bob Norton.
Yes.
I'd be interested in your ideas of how this applies to Iraq and what happened there.
So our survey was done after the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Is that when Mr. Bush took us to war in Iraq? I believe that Mr. Bush did bring a bit more freedom to Iraqis. In fact, I think we had real elections there. And
the elections were much more impressive than the ones that happened in the United States.
Okay. I won't follow you down that particular path. But anyway, we had elections in Iraq. And I think there would have been a general sense that there was more freedom, particularly more political freedom in Iraq after that invasion than under Saddam Hussein. But I think there was also some recognition that didn't bring them prosperity. And so I think that's why the Iraqis were different than the Lebanese and the Egyptians in seeing freedom bringing development, richness.
With all the oil that they have there, why didn't they use that to develop prosperity?
It's out of what I know. But I do think they got more freedom and actually less prosperity in the short run. And I think that's affected the kinds of answers that I showed you in that graph.
Hi, I'm Deborah Fletcher, a psychology student. My question is, what do you think are the unintended consequences of preaching so strongly against women having a lot of children? You know, the UN and a lot of people are really preaching the idea of low fertility improving the world. What do you think about that?
Okay. Thank you. Very good question. There's a whole lot of people around the world. Well, let me back up. So if you would have gone back to 1800, the whole world would probably have had an average of 5, 6, 7 children born per woman. Probably 30% of them would have died very early in life. And starting in 1800 or so in France, fertility started to go down for reasons that we're still debating and arguing about. Started to go down in the U.S. around 1850. And the rest of Western Europe had fertility declines in the last part of the 19th century. Central and Eastern Europe, fertility declined the first part of the 20th century. And then campaigns to lower fertility occurred after World War II. And in many places, fertility has gone down, as I said, most places in the world. Some places it's gone down so much that on average, women are having maybe 1.3, 1.4, 1.2 children per woman. In Japan, I think it's about 1.2. And what that number may not mean a lot to you, but that means that each generation of Japanese is going to be 60% as large as the last generation. So if there's 100 million Japanese now, 30 years from now, there will be 60 million Japanese. That's pretty phenomenal. That's not a small change. So, and another thing that happens is the whole population gets to look like me with gray hair. And you don't have very many people supporting the elderly, and you don't have very many people, so you have lots of elderly, not so many people supporting them. A lot of people have decided that isn't so good. I think a fair number of Western European populations have. I think Japan's working to change that. So I think that's one of the unintended consequences. But I think any demographer would have known that was fertility rate of 1.2 is going to have those kind of consequences. But demographers have had a developmental model in their head. I don't know where we got this. We still have it, that somehow fertility was going to go from 7, go down, and then level off at exactly 2.1. 2.1 happens to be the number it takes in today's society to replace the population. Well, now we think maybe it's going to level off at 1.4. I don't know. Maybe it'll go up to 1.6 or 1.7, but who knows? It could keep going down. You're welcome.
Well, thanks for staying and for your questions, and please join me in thanking our speaker today.